Well, guess what? The DEA has officially announced it will reschedule cannabis. Hey, I'm Morgan Davis. I'm a business attorney based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I focus on cannabis and wellness. Let's talk about how to keep your business protected and thriving. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency announced at late April that it will agree with the Department of Health and Human Services recommendation and reschedule cannabis from a Schedule I controlled substance to a Schedule III controlled substance. It will move basically a cannabis from a space where it is held with things like heroin and methamphetamines that says it has no accepted medical use and is highly addictive into a category that allows for accepted medical uses. Most of the cannabis operators already in this space are throwing a huge party because it also takes off the 280E tax exemption ban for them, which means they can start potentially recovering some of their taxes every year. But what does it mean for the rest of us? So to be clear, the DEA has announced its intention to propose a rule. It's still exciting. I'm excited, we're all excited, but they haven't announced a rule. They haven't announced when they will do it. And anybody who's familiar with the rulemaking process, it's not short. For example, all of us in the hemp and CBD industry have been waiting 6 years for the rulemaking process to finish. So just keep that in mind. What does the process look like? First, a rule must be drafted and actually proposed by the DEA. We'll see when that happens. Second, that rule is subject to White House and OMB approval, which we assume they'll get since the White House and the executive branch was pushing this along the way, but who knows, we'll see. Also depends on who's in the White House at that point. Third, it's likely that the rule is subject to congressional approval. There's some language around Congress gets approval when there are major rule changes. I think a lot of people would agree that this would be a major rule change, and so it's possible that Congress has to approve it in addition to the traditional rulemaking process. It's not guaranteed. Maybe they won't. Congress might, decide to make their own legislation between now and when the DEA finishes this, which will throw a really fun wrench into the whole situation. But nonetheless, if it requires congressional approval, that's an additional step. Finally, if it goes through all that and we accomplish it, Schedule III puts cannabis, which includes THC and CBD, in the crosshairs of the Food and Drug Administration, everybody's favorite agency, the FDA. And we all know how fast the FDA is at regulating these types of products. So, all I'm saying is, get excited, it's happening, but it could be a very long time until it's complete. Once all of this is complete, manufacturers and distributors will then have to register with the DEA and comply with whatever regulations they've come up with, potentially also have to seek approval from the FDA. There is significant concern that none of the current medical operators in state-approved programs meet the standards that the DEA would set for Schedule III controlled substances, specifically Schedule III medical cannabis at a federal level. So that means that the current medical operators are not guaranteed to be able to get DEA approval down the line. That's all speculation at this point because nothing's been developed. But it's based on where the industry has been before, where it is currently, and what the DEA generally requires for Schedule III controlled substance dispensaries and authorized dispensers. What could happen in the meantime? In the meantime, Congress could decide to move on any of the smaller issues that surround cannabis, for example, taxation, insurance, business loans, criminal justice, you name it, really. Or they could decide on, we could all be thrown for a huge loop and they could decide on some sweeping legislation that legalizes it for everyone. What should be clear is that the DEA's rescheduling from Schedule I to Schedule III has zero effect does not in any way legalize the adult use or recreational use of cannabis. It also may or may not affect the hemp industry. Industrial hemp is removed by the 2018 Farm Bill from the Controlled Substances Act altogether. But as we've talked about many times, there's this debate going on where all these other derivatives like Delta 8 and Delta 10 and HHC, et cetera, THCV, are synthetic or they are intoxicating, and they were not meant to be covered by the language of the 2018 Farm Bill. There are two sides to that story. I happen to agree that the 2018 Farm Bill is very clear. It includes all derivatives, all isomers, all salts, all acids, everything. But there is DEA guidance that tends to lean in the direction of those that are synthetically made, those that do not naturally occur and are not naturally derived, are still a Schedule I controlled substance. It's still potentially and probably a long road to us seeing this happen and then be implemented. And then watch that come down to how does that affect the everyday business operator and consumer. State level changes and adjustments should be expected and anticipated while this is ongoing. Some states may choose to stay silent and keep the status quo. Others may start to try and pivot to federal standards to try and get ahead of the ball. We don't know, but you need to be watching out. And if you are thinking about becoming a medical cannabis operator or getting into the game, then that's something you should start preparing for now and start asking the questions of what do I need to do to potentially prepare for this rescheduling and to be able to operate once the rescheduling happens. If you have any questions about any of the above, give us a call and we'll have an update as things progress.